Now our lesson today is taken from the 32nd and 33rd chapters of Genesis, and we're going to be mainly looking at Jacob and Esau reunion. So let me go ahead and read the lesson text in Genesis, the 32nd chapter, beginning with verse 6. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. And then jumping down to verse 11, Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. Then going down to verse 20, And say ye moreover, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face. Peradventure he will accept of me. Then looking at verses 24 through 28. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou a power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And then jumping down at the end of the chapter, verse 30, And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Then going over to chapter 33, looking at verses 1 through 5, And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the 2 handmaids. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. And he passed over before them, and bowed himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him, and embraced him, and fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted up his eyes, and saw the women and the children, and said, Who are these with thee? And he said, The children which God hath graciously given thy servant. Then jumping down to verse 11, Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. Now, as I was saying, our lesson today is about Jacob's reunion with Esau. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've looked at the problem between Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were born to Isaac and Rebekah, and they were twin brothers. And when it was time for them to be born, Esau came out of the womb first, but as he was coming out, Jacob reached out and grabbed his heel. And when Rebekah was pregnant with Esau and Jacob, they were continually struggling in her womb, and she was concerned about it. And she prayed about it, and the Lord told her that the elder is going to serve the younger. And what happened there is that Jacob, when he grabbed Esau's foot, he was named the supplanter, or the trickster, because it seemed like he was trying to trip him up so he could be born first. And basically in the first lesson we saw that God had chosen Jacob to be the child of promise. Now, Abraham had been given a promise that through his seed all of the world would be blessed. He had 2 sons born to him, Ishmael and Isaac. God told him Isaac is the child of promise. So take Ishmael and his mother and put them away from you. Now we see Isaac has 2 sons, and the younger one is now known as the child of promise. This is the child that God is going to bring blessing to the whole world. And Isaac was blessed with the same, with God telling him exactly through the same thing, that through your seed, singular, I'm going to bless the entire world. Abraham was told, through thy seed, singular, I'm going to bless the entire world. Now Joseph, singular, is given the same promise by God, that through your seed, I'm going to bless all the world. Unfortunately, Jacob and his mother weren't content to wait for God to work. So they, well, first of all, Esau, the Bible says that he was a wicked man. And he despised his inheritance. When he was out hunting one day, he was known to be a man's man. He was a big hunter. He was a big warrior. He was a big fighter. Big tough guy. But he was out hunting one day, couldn't find anything to eat, and he got hungry, so he came back to camp. And there was Jacob, who was more a farmer, raised his cattle, his crops. And he told Jacob, I'm so hungry, I'm about to die. Jacob looks at him and says, well, if you're that hungry, I'll give you a bowl of beans if you'll sell me your inheritance. And Esau's reply was, well, if I die, if I die of hunger, what good's the inheritance going to do me anyway? So he agreed. He despised his inheritance. He despised what he was supposed to get, and he sold it all for nothing more than a bowl of beans. Jacob, on the other hand, now that he has the birthright, there comes a time in last week's lesson when Isaac thinks he's dying. He's sick. He thinks he's dying. So he calls his sons together, or he calls Esau, who's his favorite son, and tells him, I'm going to die, but before I die, I want another piece of that good venison, wild venison that you find. Go hunt me some wild deer and bring it to me. So he goes out hunting. While he's gone, Jacob's mother hears what Isaac says to Esau, and she comes back to Jacob and says, your dad's about to die and he's wanting to give the blessing away, and he's going to give it to Esau. So Jacob takes the lamb's wool, covers his body with it because Esau is a very hairy man, and brings him venison, and he's the sheepskin that he's covered in with the hair on it is old and musty, smells like something been out in the woods for a while. So when he comes to his dad says, I'm weak of eyes. You sound like Jacob, but I don't know if you're Esau or not. So come closer. So he leans over and he feels that hair on him and says, oh yeah, that's Esau. So he ends up giving this blessing, which is, in biblical days, was considered almost a prophecy about how your life would be. And it was an extremely important deal. And just after he finishes giving that blessing to Jacob, Jacob leaves and Esau comes in and finds out that Jacob's got his blessing in addition to his birthright. So he swears to kill him. So in their own wisdom, Rebekah and Jacob decide that he needs to go north. Now all this is happening right around in here, in this area. And they're going to have to send him all the way up to the rest of his family, way up here, about 550 miles away. So he journeys all the way up here. And his mama tells him, stay with our relatives for a few days, and then come back, and by that time Esau will be over his mad fit. Instead, he ends up staying up here for 20 years. And then God tells him after about 20 years to go back home. So he gathers up everything that he's accumulated in the 20 years and starts going back home. And one of the big things that we looked at was that what Rebekah and Jacob did, they were acting out of their own wisdom, out of their own understanding. Their idea was, go up here, it's going to take you 2 or 3 months to get up there. Stay there 2 or 3 months, and then come back home. That maybe 9 months to a year. By that time, Esau's going to be over his mad fit, and everything's going to be okay. But it didn't work out that way. While he was gone, he spent 20 years gone. In that meantime, his mother died. His father, that was at the point of death, as he thought, actually lived, he was about 100 and something years old then. He lived to be about 180. So now God, in our lesson today, beginning in Genesis 32 and verse 1, Jacob is on his way back. Now there's some things that Jacob has learned and experienced that I'm not going to get into a great amount of detail. But while he's around here in Haran, he finds a wife. And in many societies, you have to pay a bride price. With the Indians here in America, the Plains Indians, if you found a woman that you wanted for your wife, you would go and dicker with her dad. And you would end up saying, well, how many horses do I have to bring you to get you to give her to me for a wife? That was called a bride price. If he said 6 horses, then you had to find a way to get 6 horses. You bring him 6 horses. If he liked the looks of the horses, you got a wife. So, in Haran, Jacob goes to Laban and works out the same kind of deal. And that deal is, I will work for you for 7 years for Rachel. I'll work for you for nothing for 7 years if you'll give me Rachel as my wife. He works for 7 years, he gets his wife, and wakes up the next morning to find out it wasn't the one he wanted. He got her older sister, Leah. So he goes back to his daddy, his father-in-law, and says, wait a minute, now I told you I wanted Rachel. I've been working the last 7 years for Rachel, and you pawned off Leah on me. And he looks at him and says, oh, I thought you knew that. He said, in our nation, we can't give the younger daughter if the older one's not married already. That's your fault. You didn't understand what I was saying. Now, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you really want Rachel as your wife, you work for me for another 7 years, and then I'll give her to you. So he does. So he ends up working for 14 years to get the woman he loves to be his wife. Then he starts working for his father-in-law. His father-in-law says, I'll pay you. You stay here, I'll pay you. So for the next 6 years, he works for his father-in-law, and every time it comes time to pay him, his father-in-law changes the deal. For 6 years. Finally, after 6 years, Jacob overhears his brother-in-laws talking about how he's become a more important man than their daddy, so they maybe need to go kill him and take everything he's got. Jacob at this point realizes, hey, I ain't welcome. So he gets everything he's got and everything that Laban had told him he could have and takes off with it coming back home. God's already told him to leave. While he's pondering that's when he finds out that Laban's other sons are planning on killing him. So he makes his way back down here. Now, on the way down in here, he's evidently coming down on this side of the Jordan River. He's got a big, huge problem. He's leaving a place where he's been tricked, deceived, lied to, and stolen from, going to a place where he has tricked, deceived, and stolen from, and now he's got to hope that everything's okay. Along this way, he's starting to learn some lessons. First of all, one of them is to listen to what God says. You know, God didn't tell him to go and trick Isaac. He didn't tell him to go and just do what you want to get the blessing. He did it on his own. He relied on earthly wisdom. And then on his journey home, Jacob encounters angels of the Lord. You see that in last part of verse 1 and verse 2. And that along the way, when he encounters the angels, that he knows that they're from the Lord. So he's going to his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Now, right here is the Dead Sea. Edom is this land right in here. Right up in here is the land of Ammon. Right up here, right in through this area here, is the land of Moab. The Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Edomites were almost always enemies of Israel. Now this is where his brother's at, so that's where he's going. So he goes down there to meet him, and he gets right here, which is called the Brook of Jabbok. And that's kind of where we're at now. He's there, and he's trying to make peace and make plans in case everything doesn't go right, because he doesn't know if his brother's going to welcome him back with open arms or opening up his stomach. So he begins in verses 9 through 21, he begins to pray. And one of the first things that we see that he's learned in verse 10 is humility. He tells the Lord, I am not worthy of the least of all thy mercies. He said in verse 11, deliver me, I pray thee. You see, what he's understanding is that he is not in control of everything. That he's having to rely upon the Lord. That God's the only one who will get him out of this problem. And then we see in verse 13, he lodged there that same night and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau, his brother. Instead of trying to bluff his way through or try to figure out some wise way to get through it, he decides to appease him. Maybe if I give him enough, he'll be happy and go home. In verse 20 he says, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me. I'm going to show him I want to be at peace with him.